It's really just the content of the words. You could represent a book in digital form like this. So this is some markup, some XML markup, where the text of the book, and this is some classic, something from some classics. This is some translation, but this is the informational content of the book. Okay, and there's some maybe some analysis that says, I don't know, like this is a header for this section. This whole thing is a translation, but this is book as information. Okay, and there's a middle ground. It says, well, a book is primarily information, but not totally. So let's make sure that we are representing the page. And this is, this is your very basic kind of imaging of a book. In this case, bitonal. There's another reason that in some cases, even if a book is totally thought of as an informational thing, that you might want to present an image, because the way you go from scanning a book to this kind of text, if you're doing something at a really large scale, well, even a medium scale, is by optical character recognition, OCR. So you scan a page of a book, right? There are these letters that we can read on here as humans, but to get from this, because remember, these are just pixels, right? So all the way back to my first slide, this is not the letter I in a digital image. This is a bunch of zeros and ones in a grid. It's not the letter I. To get it to letters in electronic text, optical character recognition is software that reads the image, so to speak, and says, okay, this arrangement of black pixels here is an I, and this looks like a T, and it extracts that. So that optical character recognition process doesn't always do a very good job. It does a lot of the time, but oftentimes there are errors. And so showing the page is sometimes a hedge on any errors that may be introduced through optical character recognition. So in projects like this is Making of America from University of Michigan. This is an early, relatively speaking, digital library project from the late 90s, early 2000s. They scanned thousands of books. They OCR'd them. The OCR drives the full text search. So when you go up there and you click search, you're searching something that looks like this behind the scenes. But rather than show users all of the potential errors that are in that OCR, they're going to show you this. So part of that is a hedge against errors in the OCR. Part of it's also because they somewhat valued the book as an artifact. But even though it's true, like, what is this, right? So this is some kind of seal of, probably of the agency that produced this report. It's pretty unintelligible. I can't really make out what that is. So this is kind of a middle ground where a book is, I'd say, more informational, but there's a little bit of the sense of the book as an artifact there. All right, now this is really the other side of the spectrum, where the book as artifact is really important. So you can see it looks really different, obviously. For one thing, you can see it's obviously in color. So, right, so bitonal, black and white only, which causes sometimes things that might have fine, I'm not sure if this is fuzzy because of the scale we're looking at it, or if there were any kind of midtones in there that are just getting lost as it gets thresholded up to white, or up to black, or down to white, or so forth. But anyway, color, obviously, but notice there's a lot of other differences here. We're not just looking at one page. We're looking at the two-page spread, because when you're looking at an illuminated manuscript like that, that's an important part of the object. That's part of understanding what the thing is. Not only are we looking at a two-page spread, but we see the page edges, right? You see all the way into the gutter of the book. You see the page edges. You see even beyond the page edges in this case. You see other pages, and you go all the way to the cover, the inside of the cover. So so there's a margin all around. So different choices, right, in the way the imaging is done. Deliberate choices, not accidental choices. All getting back to this concept. Right, so this is the concept where, again, reflection on what your content is and what you're doing with it, why you're digitizing it. And you could, I suppose you could hypothetically imagine a project where you only cared about the text, maybe. I mean, I know that seems strange, but if that was your project, you don't need to image the book like this. You could do this. You could have somebody, and this would have to be transcribed as opposed to OCR, but you could have somebody just transcribe all the text and represent it as electronic text. And that would be the way you digitize these books. But in this case, clearly a choice is made that this is really a book as an artifact, it's artwork. Not only is it artwork, but it's the spread of the book, like what you're seeing as you open the two-page spread. It's important, and so it was scanned accordingly. Okay, so that's one important concept. Another important concept that I find most in the library and archive space is this idea of, as you're digitizing, you're creating a master, which is sometimes called a preservation master. And then it's from that master that you make all of your various use derivatives. Right? So it's a little bit, so if you think of this as your archival copy, your preservation copy, these are the copies that are dictated by how people are going to use them in different ways. If you digitize to this without this, the quality might be lower. People like to use JPEGs. JPEGs work on the web. TIFFs don't work. Uncompressed TIFFs don't work so well. I mean, you can send them to a browser, but not all browsers render them very well. They take a long time to send over the network. You don't need to send that much information usually to a web browser. So JPEGs have a place, but remember, if that's what you're digitizing to without this concept of a master, you're losing something. You're losing the greatest possible quality and the most reusability of the work that you're doing. The other thing that I think is important to understand is that the particular derivatives that support usages change pretty rapidly, right? So today, at a certain point, today it might be GIF, JPEG, or GIF or GIF. Different formats come. This is a way of viewing very large images that is the same idea that's behind Google Maps. Where as you zoom in and out of something that's very, very large, you might see little squares of the image load at different resolution levels. So there are a couple different image formats where this is the derivative that you make, and this is called a pyramid of tiles. The idea is that, and this supports zooming of very large images. So the idea is that if you were to zoom all the way out and see, like, I guess this is, the west coast of the United States. If you were to zoom all the way out on the west coast of the United States as an image, in your browser, right, pretty tiny. So it can be represented by one square. As you start to zoom in, it takes up more space on your web browser, for example. So now it's 4 squares. You zoom in a little more, you may only be looking at this section of it, but behind it, this whole image is represented by 16, and so forth. So this whole notion of a derivative is, I don't want to say it's brand new, but it's not how people were viewing large images on the web 15 years ago. We don't know what's coming next. We really don't. I just assume that this space, which is how people use things, is going to change. It's going to keep changing. It might change quickly. There may be something else for viewing on mobile devices, a different kind of derivative that you want to make. For example, so the concept here is you keep, to the best that you can afford to store it, you keep the highest quality, uncompressed, unaltered preservation master, and you make from that as many derivatives as you need to. You can always remake the derivatives from this. If this format changes a little bit, I can go back to here and just remake it, right? So this stuff, in some cases, might not even be important to keep, because again, you assume it's just something that's made for a particular use case, and maybe that use case changes, right? But that you're keeping. So that's an important concept. Okay, so there's all these decisions that when you're doing a digitization project you have to make. And this has been, I guess, through the thread through my whole talk. So right, this is one of the very basic decisions you make. And we saw examples of all of this. And again, I think there could be a temptation to just say, well, we're going to scan everything in color because, that's safe, and we don't want to regret having not scanned something in color. But I mean, I can think of a project that we did in my department where we scanned 50 years of press releases from the university, and they were all in office paper. They had absolutely no color information. They were all just typewritten or mimeograph copies. And so we chose to scan them in bitonal because there was really nothing to be gained. And this also gets back to that part of that idea of, is it information or artifact? There's really no artifactual value whatsoever to the paper that the press release was on, at least in our determination. I mean, somebody could, I suppose, argue differently, but in our case, we knew for our project needs, we were only interested in the information in those press releases, not about the paper used or the font or the typewriter font that was used. So it would just be a waste of our resources, and honestly, the time it takes in many cases to produce a color image is much greater than a bitonal image. So we scan them bitonally. So they are real. These are real choices to be made. Okay, so how do you decide? Resolution is often a very tricky one. And there are some general rules of thumb that you can fall back on. But the way that those rules of thumb were created, and what I'm talking about here is, when I say rules of thumb, is things like, color, commercially printed texts. So things where, they're texts that have been produced with mechanical or electronic type or something. You can say that generally they should be scanned at X DPI. Out in the library world, there are these kind of conventions. But how those conventions are reached, and if you really want to be specific to your particular content, you can do what's called a benchmarking process, which essentially means a really close analysis of the features of your content. So what you're trying to do when you arrive at a particular resolution is identify what the smallest detail in your source that you want to make sure is represented in your digital image.